I never expected the moment that changed everything to arrive at 6:12 a.m., carried by the sound of an engine that absolutely did not belong on my property. But when I stepped onto my porch, coffee in hand, what I saw made me freeze mid-sip. An HOA Karen in a spotless white SUV, parked right in the middle of my wheat field, like she owned the place. Not beside it. Not near the edge. Dead center. Crushing weeks of work beneath her tires as if my land was just an optional extension of her neighborhood's parking lot. Most people would walk out there, knock on the window, and politely ask the intruder to move. But after weeks of dealing with this same woman, ignoring warnings, signs, and common sense, I had reached a point where polite had packed its bags and moved to another state. So I did something different. But before I take you to the giant catapult, and trust me, it's even better than it sounds, you need to understand how the situation spiraled, to the point where launching an SUV into the sky felt less like revenge, and more like a public service. It began 3 weeks earlier. That was the first time her HOA hosted some community block party disaster and overflowed their cars into every available inch of space. I lived just outside their neighborhood boundary, on 15 acres of peaceful farmland, purposely not under HOA rule, but peace. That became ancient history the moment Karen decided my property was their temporary event lot. I tried warnings. I tried friendliness. I tried those huge neon signs no one could possibly ignore. Yet every weekend, without fail, there she was again. Same SUV, same attitude. Same, it's just a few feet of grass, don't be dramatic. Except it wasn't grass. It was food I was growing. And she knew it. One evening I caught her telling another HOA member that farmers don't actually care about where cars drive because it all looks the same. Anyway, that was the moment. The idea formed, half insane, half brilliant, entirely fueled by frustration and caffeine. The catapult project started as a joke, a ridiculous sketch on a scrap of paper taped to my fridge. But the more Karen ignored my boundaries, the more serious that sketch became. I had the space, I had the materials, and honestly, I had the motivation of a man who'd been pushed one crushed crop too far. By the time Chapter 2 begins, the catapult is real, massive, terrifying, and waiting. The morning I finished building the catapult, the sky looked like it was holding its breath. A thin fog drifted low across the field, and the smell of fresh lumber, steel brackets, and rope resin hung in the air. I stood back and stared at the thing I had created. Part medieval war machine, part engineering experiment, and entirely a product of my simmering irritation. It wasn't subtle. This wasn't the kind of contraption you mistake for a fence or a tool shed. No, this monster stood nearly 2 stories tall, with an arm long enough to fling a cow if I ever lost my mind entirely. And before anyone judges me too quickly, remember, I didn't build it with the intention of actually using it. Not at first. My plan was to let Karen see it, panic a little, and finally understand that I wasn't bluffing when I said stay out of my field. But things rarely go according to plan when Karen is involved. Around noon, as I tested the tension of the launch arm, I heard the distant rumble of a familiar engine. I froze. Not today, I thought. Not when the machine is literally sitting here like a wooden monster waiting to be fed. But sure enough, the white SUV came rolling down the gravel edge of my property, slow and deliberate, as if savoring the audacity of what it was about to do. And then, unbelievably, she drove right past the bright orange barrier cones I'd set up that morning. Not around them. Through them. Flattened one like it was made of paper. She parked in the same exact spot she always chose, crushing a fresh patch of wheat I'd planted 2 nights earlier. Then she stepped out, wearing oversized sunglasses and a bright blue HOA windbreaker, like she was on some kind of official mission. "Morning," she chirped, waving. "I'll only be a few hours. HOA meeting." "Overflow keeps happening!" "Thanks for being flexible." Flexible. As if my land was some kind of yoga mat. I walked toward her, still holding the thick rope I'd been testing on the catapult. She glanced at the machine, her expression unchanged, like giant siege weapons grew naturally on farms. "What's that thing?" she asked casually. "A boundary," I said. "One you keep ignoring." She laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, come on. You're not seriously going to use that." And that was the moment I realized something important. Karen believed I was all bark and no bite, which meant she was about to learn, very painfully, that I had both. Karen's laugh echoed across my field long after she finished making the sound. It was the laugh of someone who assumed the world bent around her convenience. The laugh of a person who had never faced consequences tougher than a politely worded HOA notice. But I stood there holding the rope of a fully functional catapult. And for the first time, she seemed genuinely oblivious to how close she was to becoming airborne property. She turned away from me and headed toward her SUV, rummaging in the back for a stack of HOA clipboards as if she planned to host her meeting right there, in the middle of my wheat. The nerve of this woman was almost impressive. Almost. Karen, I said, trying to offer one last sliver of sanity. I need you to move your vehicle. Now. She didn't even look up. I said I'll only be a couple hours. You farmers get so sensitive. It's just plants. Just plants. Those 2 words snapped the last thread of patience in my body. I looked at the catapult, then at the SUV, then back at the catapult. The idea wasn't born in anger this time. It was born in clarity. A calm, almost peaceful certainty washed over me. I walked slowly toward the machine, grabbed the release pin hook, and began tightening the arm. Wood creaked. Ropes groaned. The entire structure shuddered as it awakened. What are you doing?" Karen asked, finally glancing over. "Demonstrating cause and effect," I said. She frowned. "This is harassment." "Then stop harassing my field." She opened her mouth, no doubt preparing another masterpiece of HOA-grade entitlement, when a gust of wind swept across the farm, lifting dust and wheat chaff in a golden swirl. It was dramatic. It was cinematic. It was perfect. I lowered the throwing, cradle to the ground, and positioned it beside the SUV's front bumper. Her eyes widened. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm very serious. Touch my vehicle and I will sue you into the afterlife." "You parked on private property," I reminded her. "After multiple warnings, you made your choice." She darted forward to block me, planting herself between the SUV and the catapult, like a very determined traffic cone. But I had anticipated that. I stepped aside, looped the rope around the bumper, and began tightening it to the cradle harness. The moment Karen realized I wasn't bluffing, she shrieked, a high, sharp sound that startled even the crows in the trees. She lunged for the rope, but by then, the SUV was already anchored, and the catapult was already locked. Karen froze the moment the catapult arm clicked into its final position, a deep, resonant thunk that rolled across the field like distant thunder. It was the kind of sound that meant there was no turning back, no undoing, no pretending this was all just an exaggerated warning. The SUV sat cradled in the launching frame, tethered by the thick rope harness. That looked comically small compared to the consequence it carried. "This is illegal!" Karen shouted, backing away as though the machine itself might lunge at her. "So is trespassing," I replied calmly. "So is ignoring posted signs. So is destroying private property." She pointed a shaky finger at me. "You are not going to launch my SUV." But her voice cracked, betraying the terror blooming behind her sunglasses. I stepped beside the catapult and tested the rope release once more. Everything was tight, secure, and balanced. An hour earlier, it had been a theoretical device. Now it was an inevitability. "Karen," I said, "I warned you a dozen times. This is your last chance to move the vehicle yourself." She sputtered, searching desperately for authority to hide behind. I'll call the HOA president." "I'm on my own land." "I'll call the sheriff." "Please do," I said. "I'd love to show them my damaged fields." That stopped her. She looked at the flattened wheat beneath her. Tires, something she had never actually acknowledged until now. For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt on her face. Maybe even guilt. She stepped toward the SUV, intent on climbing in. But the moment she touched the handle, the catapult ropes groaned. The entire structure flexed, wood fibers stretching like a beast awakening. She yelped and jumped back. "You tied it to the bumper!" "It's more secure that way," I said. "Safety first." "You're insane." "Probably," I said. "But at least I respect property lines." I reached for the release lever. Karen's jaw dropped. She lunged toward me, but I sidestepped easily. She tripped, stumbled into the dirt, and scrambled back to her feet. "Stop!" she screamed. "We can talk about this." "Funny," I said, "because talking hasn't worked so far." The wind picked up again, carrying her frantic breathing and the taut hum of the tensioned ropes. The catapult's arm trembled, ready, waiting. I placed my hand on the release. Karen gasped. "Don't, please." For a brief moment I hesitated, not out of mercy, but because I wanted her to feel that moment. The moment where she finally understood she wasn't untouchable. Then I pulled the lever. The release lever snapped forward with a violent metallic crack, and for a heartbeat, the entire world paused. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then the catapult arm unleashed its full force, whipping upward in a blur of wood and rope. The SUV didn't just lift, it launched, as if yanked skyward by an invisible giant tired of its nonsense. Karen's scream tore across the farm, sharp enough to send birds erupting from the tree line. She dropped to her knees, hands clamped over her mouth as the SUV arced impossibly high above the field. Sunlight flashed across its windows. The undercarriage caught the light like a chrome meteor. It was both catastrophic and strangely beautiful. For a split second, I wondered if I had taken things too far. But then I remembered the weeks of crushed crops, ignored warnings, and her smug insistence that my land was just extra space. The SUV sailed over the far fence and disappeared, behind a gentle rise in the field. A distant boom shook the ground, followed by the metallic whump of something landing in a patch of soft, unplanted soil. Silence. Karen blinked rapidly, stunned. You launched it. I crossed my arms. Well, it wasn't going to move itself. She looked like a malfunctioning robot, mouth opening, closing, opening, trying to reboot her understanding of the laws of physics and personal boundaries. When she finally spoke, her voice was a shredded whisper. I'm calling the police. Great, I said. I'll walk with you. We can show them where your SUV landed. She glared at me like she wished she could hurl me with a catapult next. But she followed, trembling with a mix of fury, embarrassment, and disbelief. We reached the crash site, where the SUV sat nose down in the dirt like an embarrassed ostrich. Miraculously, it wasn't destroyed. Bent, beaten, humbled, but intact. Karen gasped in horror. My poor Lexus. Better than my whole field, I replied. When the sheriff finally arrived, he listened to both sides, with the patience of a man who had absolutely seen worse in this county. He stared at the tire tracks running through my crops. He stared at the SUV embedded in the dirt. He stared at the catapult towering behind us like a medieval lawsuit in progress. Then he sighed. Ma'am, he told you not to park here, Karen sputtered. He launched my car. And you trespassed, the sheriff said. Repeatedly. In the end, she got fined. She had to pay for the crop damage. The HOA issued an apology letter. And Karen? She never set foot near my land again. As for the catapult, I kept it, just in case.